It's an honor to be here. I'm excited to follow Vanita Gupta, who is an incredible champion for the movement when she was in the Civil Rights Division, and to be amongst you. I've been told that in moments of uncertainty, that explanation beats eloquence. So today I have 3 ideas, 3 stories, and 1 question. And the question is, what will you do to be a bridge? The first story, I taught 6th grade math in East New York, Brooklyn. I loved 6th grade. 7th grade is puberty and deodorant, and it is a tough time for everybody. But 6th grade is a beautiful time because they still believe in magic. And I was a math teacher, so kids came in really math phobic. But I knew that they wanted to be a part of a success story, and I could build that in my classroom. But the reason I start as a teacher is because my kids always wanted to go to gym. That they'd be like, Mr. Mckesson, can I go to gym? And I'm like, no, we gotta do some more math. And one day I was like, you know what, you can go to gym. And they came back really quickly. And I was like, well, why are you back? I thought you wanted to go to gym. And what we realized is that they actually were in love with the idea of gym. They weren't in love with the work of gym. And I say that because I think about that in the context of the movement today and the resistance. That there are a lot of people who are in love with the idea of resistance and not the work of resistance. And when we think about this moment, there is so much at stake. That in this year alone, 423 people have been killed by the police. That in 2016, 3 people were killed each day by the police. That we think about not too long ago, a white man walked into a black church and killed 9 black people as they prayed to their God. And the ADL just logged 541 anti-Semitic threats or attacks just in the first 3 months of this year alone. Now, I say all that because we have to remember that because the trauma is present, the work has to be present. And there are a lot of people who think that the conversation about the work is enough. But we know that what will be important is that we become bridge builders between what we know to be true and the work that has to be done. And my question to you here is, what will you do to be a bridge builder? What will you do to be someone who links the things we know that have to happen to the actions? Will you be a person who makes phone calls? Will you organize in your house, in your synagogue, in churches, in other communities? Or will you be someone who just talks about it? And I say that because, again, I think there are a lot of people who are in love with the idea of resistance and not the work of resistance. And as the trauma remains present, the work will always be present. I think about myself as somebody, when Mike Brown got killed on August 9th, 2014, I was in Minneapolis working for the school system. And on August 16th, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, it was a Saturday. I was on my couch, I was watching what was unfolding on CNN, and I saw what was happening on Twitter. And I was like, I'm gonna go. And I got up, got in the car, I drove 9 hours to Missouri. I didn't know anybody in Missouri or St. Louis. And I just got in the middle of the street, and that was my story. And for 3 years, we've been in the streets. And I made that decision to go because I felt called to go, and that was my way of being a bridge builder in that moment. And in this moment, the call to everybody is, what will you do given that the crisis is so real? Now, when I think about the police, people often confuse a movement as a movement that is against the police. And what we would say is that we are pro-justice and pro-safety. And this has never been about the police, but it has been about a conception of safety. What does it mean to be safe in homes, in society? What does it mean to be safe in the streets? And that is what we have been fighting for every single day. Now, the second idea is about stories. If I ask you, where do you feel safe? Have you ever been in love? Who was your favorite teacher? That your response to those things would be stories. That what we know to be true is that stories are the way that ideas travel. And when we think about protests, when I think about protest as this idea of telling the truth in public. That we stand in streets to tell the truth with our bodies, that we disrupt board meetings and commissions to tell the truth, that institutions aren't using their power in ways that benefited the lives of people of color. That this act is deeply rooted in truth-telling. And that we know that systems and structures change the way that people behave, but it's stories that change people's minds. And it's neighbors that do that storytelling work. That it is true when we stand in the street, that when we have been tear gassed and pepper sprayed, and when people have been beaten, that we have been doing it because we know that we are storytellers. That as people of color, we've always faced these issues of erasure, and erasure often manifests in 2 ways. One is either the story is never told or is told by everybody but us. And in this moment, we became the unerased. Social media allowed us to push back on dominant culture narratives and tell the truth about what was happening. Most of you saw Baltimore as the first city where you saw the aerial footage of the protests, and that was because you couldn't see it in St. Louis because they made a no-fly zone almost immediately because they knew that the story was so damning that it would radicalize people. People forget that in August, in September, and October of 2014, it was illegal to stand still in St. Louis, that you'd be arrested if you stood still for more than 5 seconds, and it was called the 5-second rule. People also forget that we were in the street for more than 360 days in the beginning. People think about the initial protests in Ferguson as if it was just a long month, and we know that we were there through all the seasons. That's how I remember the protests. And I say that because the reason that we took to the streets is that we tried everything else and people weren't listening to the stories. That we had never been the voiceless, we had always been the unheard, and it was a way to be heard. And I think about people in the streets now because of the Muslim ban or all the other crises that are happening, is that people are trying to tell the story about what this country can be. And my question to you in this vein is how will you be a bridge builder between the stories that you know and the stories that need to be told, and the stories that you know and the stories that you don't yet know? How are you putting yourself in a position to learn new things and to be exposed to different perspectives that are not your own? And the third is a more recent story. The other day I was at the office and I was hungry. And we had ordered pizza for the office, but the person that ordered it was a little slow. And I was like, I'm really hungry. And they were like, what do you want? And I was like, I'll just eat anything right now. And I looked on the bookshelf, and there was this package that looked like dried fruit. So I was like, cool, let me just get some dried fruit, not a big deal, before I get the pizza. And it was actually dried tomatoes. And dried tomatoes taste exactly like they sound. They are awful. And I bit into these dried tomatoes, and I was like, this is bad. And I think about that because when somebody asked me what did I want, I said anything. And I say that because in this moment, when we ask people, what do you think the future can be, people essentially say anything. And that if you cannot imagine a future, you can't fight for it. That people have confused resistance as only being opposition to things, but we know that the other part of resistance is about pushing forth for a beautiful future. It's about having a conception about what justice and liberty looks like, and about being able to tell people what that is. And then we have a society and a conversation that only reminds us of the hunger about what can be without actually fleshing it out. We are actually not resisting in full. And when I think about what the future can be, when I think about safety alone, we know that there will always be rules, that people will break rules and there should be consequences. Do those consequences always have to be enforced by the police? No. Do the consequences always have to lead to jail? No. But it is about saying, how do we think about and reimagine what justice looks like at scale? How do we push people to tell stories about what the future can be and not just be sad and frustrated about what the present is? So the question there is, how will you be a bridge between the world that we have today and the world that we deserve? I'll end with the final question is, how will you be a bridge over these troubled waters? Thank you.